The base was unusually quiet before dawn. Only the soft hum of generators and the occasional clatter of boots broke the stillness. Two pilots sat side by side in the briefing room, their faces lit by the cold glow of the monitors in front of them. The weight of what lay ahead hung heavy in the air. They had been on countless missions, but none quite like this one. Their commander's voice was steady but grim as he detailed the mission. Intelligence has confirmed enemy fighters are increasing patrols in the area. We have a critical cargo flight that must get through safely. Your job is to escort and protect it, no matter what. The room was silent except for the soft scratching of pens on paper and the occasional clearing of a throat. One pilot, call sign Falcon, shifted his gaze toward his partner, Nighthawk. Both were experienced, having flown hundreds of hours in combat zones, yet the numbers were daunting. 12 enemy fighters against just 2 F-35s. It wasn't just the odds that unsettled them. It was the unknown. The enemy was clever, patient, and ruthless. This mission could quickly turn from escort to survival. The briefing ended with final checks. Falcon ran through the pre-flight checklist in his mind. Systems green. Fuel topped off. Weapons ready. Nighthawk double-checked their communications gear and nodded. "We've got this," he said quietly, but neither could ignore the knot tightening in their stomachs. Outside, the sky was a canvas of deep blues and purples, the first tints of dawn painting the horizon. The pilots climbed into their jets, the cockpits closing with a satisfying seal. Engines roared to life, vibrations humming through their bodies, a reminder that once airborne, there was no turning back. As they taxied to the runway, the control tower's voice crackled over the radio. "Cleared for takeoff. Stay sharp." Falcon felt his heart beat faster. He glanced at Nighthawk, who gave a small thumbs up. The jets surged forward, lifting into the chilly morning air. At altitude, the silence in the cockpit was profound. Radar screens flickered to life, scanning for threats. The cargo plane they were escorting was just ahead, its slow, lumbering shape a vulnerable target. Falcon's eyes scanned the horizon, every shadow and blip scrutinized. The beauty of the dawn was a cruel contrast to the danger that awaited. Suddenly, the radar beeped sharply. A cluster of blips appeared far in the distance, enemy fighters, moving fast and closing in. The tension snapped into sharp focus. Falcon's voice was calm but firm. "Nighthawk, contacts at 2 o'clock, 12 fighters. Brace yourself." Nighthawk's fingers tightened around the controls. "Copy that. Staying close on your 6. The two jets adjusted formation, wings close but maneuverable, ready for whatever came next. The quiet before battle was over. The enemy closed the distance rapidly. The pilots knew their training was about to be tested in ways no simulator could replicate. Every instinct screamed to stay alert, to anticipate the enemy's moves before they happened. Falcon glanced briefly at Nighthawk. "We fly like we've done it 100 times before, but remember, survival is the priority. Watch each other's backs." The enemy fighters burst from the clouds, missiles streaking toward them almost instantly. The cockpit alarms blared as heat-seeking missiles locked on. Falcon pushed the throttle forward, twisting the jet into a steep dive. Flames of flare countermeasures exploded behind him, confusing the missile's tracking system. Nighthawk mirrored the move, their jets weaving through the dusk sky like dancers in a deadly performance. The sound of engines mixed with a crackle of radio chatter and warning alerts. Each second felt stretched thin, every heartbeat amplified. As the first salvo of missiles missed by inches, Falcon knew this fight was far from over. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. The skill, discipline, and unspoken bond between these two pilots were the thin line between life and death. The battle had only just begun. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple as the two F-35s climbed higher, cutting through layers of clouds that hid unseen threats. Falcon's eyes never left the radar screen, which now flickered with dozens of blips, enemy fighters closing in like a pack of wolves surrounding their prey. The silence in the cockpit was tense, broken only by the low hum of the engines and the crackle of radio static. "Nighthawk." Falcon's voice was steady but carried an edge of urgency. "We're heading into the lion's den. Stay sharp." Nighthawk responded without hesitation. "Copy that." Eyes on the horizon. His gaze was fixed forward, scanning the dimming sky for the first sign of danger. The enemy was no longer distant. Their fighters emerged from behind the clouds like shadows, sleek and deadly silhouettes against the fading light. Falcon's heart quickened, but his face remained calm. Years of training had prepared him for this moment, yet the reality was far more intense than any simulator. Suddenly, a warning shrieked through the cockpit. Missiles, launched with ruthless precision, streaked toward the two jets. Falcon's hands moved instinctively, pushing the throttle forward as he banked sharply to the left. A burst of flares exploded behind him, trailing bright sparks meant to confuse the deadly, heat-seeking missiles. The missiles veered, but more were coming fast. Nighthawk mirrored Falcon's evasive maneuvers, twisting his jet through the sky in a desperate dance. Their F-35s were designed for agility and stealth, but even that wasn't enough against a dozen highly trained enemy pilots working in unison. The world outside became a blur of clouds, smoke trails, and fiery flares. The pilots communicated in clipped, efficient bursts, each aware that hesitation could be fatal. "Falcon, 2 o'clock, missile inbound." "Nighthawk," shouted. Falcon reacted immediately, pulling his jet into a tight spiral, forcing the missile to miss by inches. They were being hunted, targeted relentlessly. Yet, every missile they dodged, every fighter they evaded, chipped away at the enemy's advantage. The pilots pushed their jets to the limit, feeling the strain of high-speed maneuvers deep in their muscles. Suddenly, Falcon spotted an opening, a gap in the enemy formation just ahead. "Nighthawk, break left and follow my lead. I've got a plan." Nighthawk didn't hesitate. The two jets twisted through the sky, weaving between clouds and enemy fire. Using their stealth capabilities, they closed in silently on the nearest enemy fighter. Falcon fired a precision missile that streaked through the dusk and struck its target, sending the fighter spiraling out of control. The momentary victory gave them a breath of hope. "One down," Falcon said, voice steady but tired. "But they're still coming." Nighthawk nodded grimly. "We need to keep them off the cargo plane at all costs." The cargo plane, lumbering and slow, was vulnerable. Every enemy fighter they engaged meant one less threat to the precious cargo they were protecting. The pilots knew the stakes were higher than their own survival. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky darkened and visibility dropped. Night flying was dangerous, and the enemy took advantage of the shadows to mount surprise attacks. The pilot's senses were stretched thin. Every sound and movement was amplified in the cockpit. "Falcon, fuel's getting low. We can't keep this up forever," Nighthawk reported, voice calm but urgent. "We hold as long as we have to," Falcon replied, determination hardening his tone. "The mission is everything." Despite exhaustion creeping in, neither pilot showed it. They were locked in a deadly ballet, where one wrong move could mean the end. The minutes stretched like hours as they dodged missiles, engaged enemy fighters, and shielded the cargo plane. The sky was a battleground, and these two pilots were its last line of defense. Their bond was unspoken but unbreakable, a trust forged in fire and tested against overwhelming odds. As the enemy regrouped for another assault, Falcon and Nighthawk braced themselves. The fight was far from over, But their resolve was stronger than ever. They would not let the cargo plane fall. They would not fall themselves. This was more than a mission. It was a fight for survival, and they were ready to face whatever came next. The first missile slammed into the sky with a scream, lighting up the cockpit's warning panel in blazing red. Falcon's hands moved like lightning, twisting the controls with practiced precision. The jet bucked beneath him, a sudden jolt shaking every fiber of his being. He dropped into a sharp dive, the earth rushing up beneath the clouds, trying to shake the deadly heat seeker locked on his tail. Nighthawk was right beside him, pulling hard on his stick to evade his own missile. The sky had turned into a deadly maze, streaked with trails of smoke and bursts of flare light. The roar of engines filled their ears, mixed with the static of urgent radio commands and warnings. For a moment, it felt like the world was collapsing inward, every second stretching into an eternity where survival hinged on split-second decisions. Missile 2 o'clock. Nighthawk barked. Falcon snapped his head to the side, just in time to see the missile slicing through the thinning air. He fired flares again, the bright countermeasures blooming behind him like fireworks, confusing the missile's infrared sensors. The missile veered away, exploding harmlessly in the distance. They could see the enemy fighters closing in, a dozen shadows circling like sharks. The air crackled with tension as Falcon scanned the radar, searching for the next threat. They were vastly outnumbered, but their jets were built for this. Stealthy, agile, deadly. Yet even with all the technology, it was their skill and instinct that kept them alive. Falcon called out, "Stay close. Watch my 6." Their jets moved in tight formation, relying on each other's movements to anticipate attacks. They were no longer just pilots flying machines. They were warriors locked in a life-or-death dance against overwhelming odds. Suddenly, one of the enemy fighters broke away from the pack, targeting Nighthawk directly. A missile launched in a flash, screaming toward his jet. Nighthawk's jet jolted violently as he pulled hard to evade. "Falcon, I'm hit. Systems failing." Falcon's heart sank. He couldn't lose his wingman now. "Hold on, I'm coming to you." Without hesitation, Falcon broke formation, banking sharply toward Nighthawk's position. His jet sensors scanned rapidly for threats, missiles streaking dangerously close. The two jets twisted and turned through the smoky sky. Falcon fired off a warning missile that found its mark, striking the attacker trying to finish off Nighthawk. The enemy fighter spiraled downward, smoke trailing behind. "Got him," Falcon said, voice tight with relief. "Can you hold it together?" Nighthawk's voice was strained but steady. "Systems are damaged, but I'm still flying. Just keep them off me." Falcon moved into a defensive position, weaving between enemy fighters to shield Nighthawk. The cockpit alarms screamed with warnings of critical damage, but Nighthawk's training and determination kept him steady. The bond between the two pilots was their lifeline, an unbreakable trust forged in countless hours together. The enemy fighters pressed their assault, desperate to overwhelm the pair. Missiles flashed through the sky like deadly fireflies, each one a threat they had to outsmart or outrun. Falcon's focus sharpened, every move calculated. He knew that one mistake could mean the end, not just for him, but for his wingmen and the cargo they protected. Suddenly, Falcon spotted a chance. An enemy fighter had isolated itself slightly from the group. "Nighthawk, I'm going for a strike. Cover me." Nighthawk gritted his teeth. "Be careful." Falcon accelerated, stealth mode engaging as he closed in silently on the target. With precision, he launched a missile that struck true. The enemy fighter erupted in flames, spiraling out of control. The victory was brief but vital. One less enemy meant a slightly better chance for survival. The two pilots tightened their formation again, battered but unbroken. Fuel warnings began to blink in the cockpit. They were running low, but the mission was far from over. Every moment counted. They had to protect the cargo plane until it was safe. The sun dipped further below the horizon, darkness creeping across the sky. Night flying added another layer of danger. Limited visibility, disorienting shadows, and the ever-present threat of enemy fire. "Falcon, we're not done yet," Nighthawk said quietly, voice steady despite exhaustion. "We're going to make it through this." Falcon nodded silently, eyes locked on the darkening horizon. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but their will to survive and protect was stronger than ever. The night was long, the battle fierce, but they would not falter. They were pilots, warriors in the sky, and they still had a fight to finish. The sky was darkening rapidly, turning into a canvas of deep navy and scattered stars. But there was no peace up here, only the constant hum of engines and the sharp crackle of radio chatter. Falcon and Nighthawk pushed their battered jets to the limit, weaving through the night like shadows themselves, elusive and deadly. The enemy fighters were relentless. 12 shadows darted and twisted around them, each one hunting for the slightest opening, the smallest mistake. The two pilots were vastly outnumbered, but their training, skill, and unspoken connection were their greatest weapons. Every maneuver was precise, every decision critical. Falcon's eyes flicked between his instruments and the dark horizon. The enemy was closing in again, tighter this time. Missiles screamed past, trailing deadly fire. His jet shuddered from a near miss, the afterburner glowing bright as he pushed harder. "Nighthawk, they're coming in fast on our 6. Hold tight." Nighthawk responded calmly. "Copy that. I'm right behind you." His voice was steady, but Falcon could hear the strain beneath. Both jets bore the scars of the fight, dents in the fuselage, warning lights blinking red on their dashboards, fuel gauges dangerously low. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire lit up the night. One of the enemy fighters was closing in too quickly on Nighthawk. "Falcon, hostile on my tail." Nighthawk's voice tightened with urgency. Falcon turned sharply, breaking off to intercept. The two jets spiraled in a deadly dance. Falcon's jet rocked violently as rounds pinged off the hull. He fired back, tracers streaking across the dark sky. The enemy pilot was skilled, matching every move with ruthless precision. The fight was brutal, a test of nerve and reflexes. "Falcon, I'm running low on fuel," Nighthawk reported. "I can't keep this up much longer." "Just hold on," Falcon urged. "We're almost through this." The two jets fought as one, using every trick in their playbook. They dove through clouds, using the darkness to mask their movements. The enemy fighters grew frustrated, their coordinated attacks breaking down as the pilots exploited every weakness. Falcon spotted an opportunity, a gap in the enemy formation just ahead. "Nighthawk, follow me. Let's break their line." Nighthawk nodded, trust unwavering. Together, they surged forward, breaking through the enemy's front lines. Falcon fired a missile that struck an enemy fighter dead center, flames engulfing the jet as it spiraled downward. Nighthawk covered Falcon 6, firing bursts that kept attackers at bay. For a brief moment, it seemed the tide was turning, but the fight was far from over. More enemy fighters regrouped, launching a fresh wave of missiles. The sky erupted in explosions as the two pilots dodged with every ounce of skill they had left. Falcon's jet shuddered violently, the warning alarms screaming. "Hull breach detected," he muttered under his breath. Pain shot through his hands as the controls jerked. His vision blurred slightly, but he fought to stay focused. Nighthawk's voice came over the radio, steady but urgent. "Falcon, hang in there. We're almost home." The cargo plane they protected was just ahead, battered but intact. Every fighter they brought down was another step closer to safety. Time seemed to slow as they navigated the final stretch. The ground lights of their base glimmered below, a beacon after the chaos. Exhaustion clawed at them, but they pushed through, knowing the fight was not over until they touched down. "Falcon, do you read me?" "Prepare for final approach," the tower's voice crackled. "Copy," Falcon replied, voice hoarse. As they descended through the darkened sky, the enemy's last attacks came fast and furious. Missiles whizzed past, engines screamed, and the tension in the cockpit was almost unbearable. But the two pilots were unyielding. With one final burst of speed and precision, they broke free of the enemy's grasp. The runway rushed toward them, a ribbon of safety. Engines roaring, they touched down hard, tires screeching but steady. The jets slowed, systems shutting down as the pilots exhaled deeply, their bodies trembling from the adrenaline and exhaustion. They had fought a battle that few would believe possible. Outnumbered, outgunned, but unbroken. They had protected the mission and each other. As the cockpit canopies lifted, Falcon and Nighthawk met eyes, silent gratitude passing between them. They had come home, but the night would never forget the fight they fought in the shadows of the sky. The roar of the engines faded as the jets rolled to a stop, the harsh screech of tires on asphalt cutting through the heavy silence. Falcon sat in his cockpit a moment longer, sweat trickling down his brow, muscles aching from the relentless battle. Nighthawk's jet was just a few meters away, and through the dim glow of the hangar lights, Falcon saw the exhaustion etched into his partner's face. Neither spoke immediately. Words felt unnecessary after what they'd just survived. Inside the base, the sounds of hurried footsteps and the murmur of voices echoed through the hangar. Ground crew rushed forward, ready to assess the damage, but the pilots' focus was elsewhere. They had fought tooth and nail to get here, and the mission wasn't just about surviving. It was about protecting something far bigger. Falcon finally climbed out of his jet, the cold night air hitting his skin like a shock. His legs felt weak, but his mind was sharp. The weight of the mission pressed down on him more than ever. "How's Nighthawk?" a voice called from behind. It was their squadron leader, eyes scanning the battered jets. "He's holding up," Falcon replied. But his jet took a beating. The squadron leader nodded solemnly. "You both did more than anyone could have expected. 12 enemy fighters, and you still came home." Falcon looked over at Nighthawk, who was already walking toward the debrief room, every step deliberate but heavy. They both knew the fight wasn't over just yet. There would be questions, analysis, and maybe even awards. But none of that mattered as much as the fact that they had beaten the odds. In the debrief room, the air was thick with tension and fatigue. Commanders and analysts waited with serious expressions. The two pilots took their seats, the weight of the day settling in fully now. Falcon spoke first, recounting the mission with precise detail. The enemy's tactics, the missile attacks, the moments where their lives hung by a thread. Nighthawk added the parts about damage control and how close calls had almost spelled disaster. Every word held gravity, painting a picture of a fight where skill and sheer willpower were the only things standing between them and a grim fate. As the debrief ended, the squadron leader pulled Falcon aside. "You two showed what true pilots are made of. But I want to know, how did you keep your heads when the odds were so stacked against you?" Falcon paused, thinking back to the heart-pounding moments in the sky. "It wasn't just skill," he said quietly. "It was trust. Trust in each other, in our training, and in the belief that we could still make it through. When you're flying like that, every move counts, but knowing someone's got your back, that's what saves you." Nighthawk nodded in agreement. "We weren't alone out there. That bond, that connection, it was everything." Days passed, and the story of two pilots taking on a dozen enemy fighters spread quietly within the base. Their names were whispered with respect and awe. The media hadn't caught wind yet, but the squadron knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Despite the accolades, both pilots returned to the same routine. Early mornings, briefings, training flights. War wasn't glamorous, and heroism often felt like a heavy burden. But every time Falcon strapped in, or Nighthawk climbed into his jet, they carried with them the memory of that relentless fight, the hours where survival wasn't guaranteed, but their resolve never wavered. One evening, as Falcon sat in the mess hall nursing a cup of coffee, Nighthawk slid into the seat across from him. "You think we'll ever fly a mission like that again?" Nighthawk asked. Falcon smiled faintly. "I hope not. But if we do, I know we'll be ready." The two men sat in companionable silence, knowing that no matter what came next, they had already faced the impossible and lived to tell the tale. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant, but inside the base, two pilots' courage burned bright, a beacon of hope in a dangerous sky. The days that followed the mission were a strange blend of relief and restless anticipation. Falcon and Nighthawk returned to the rhythms of base life, routine briefings, maintenance checks, and training flights. But beneath the surface, both pilots carried the weight of what they'd endured. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a simmering tension that refused to let go. The base was abuzz with talk of their incredible feat. Whispers spread quickly among the crews and officers. 2 jets, 2 pilots against a dozen fighters, and they had still come home. The story was almost unbelievable, but those who knew the details understood it wasn't luck that had saved them. It was skill, courage, and a bond forged in the sky. Despite the growing admiration, Falcon found himself restless. He couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. The intelligence reports still showed increased enemy activity in the region, and the threat of another attack loomed large. Sitting idle was impossible for men trained to act. One morning, as dawn broke in streaks of pink and gold, Falcon met Nighthawk on the tarmac. The jets gleamed under the soft light, their sleek shapes a sharp contrast to the rugged landscape around them. "You ready for another round?" Falcon asked with a half-smile, knowing the answer. Nighthawk nodded, eyes sharp and steady. "Always." They climbed into their cockpits together, engines humming to life. This time, there was no briefing room tension, only the familiar focus that comes with knowing what's at stake. As they lifted off, the base fading beneath them, the vast sky ahead was both a battlefield and a sanctuary. The new mission was to patrol a corridor critical for Allied supply lines. Enemy fighters had been spotted in the area, and the cargo planes had to get through again. Falcon and Nighthawk knew the stakes. Failure wasn't an option. As they settled into formation, the sun rising behind them, their radios buzzed with updates. Enemy contacts were sparse, but that only made the tension worse. "They're waiting for us," Falcon said quietly. "Patience is their weapon." Hours passed with nothing but the hum of engines and the occasional chatter of distant radar contacts. Then, without warning, a single blip appeared on Falcon's screen, a fighter breaking through the clouds. It was a probe testing defenses. "Contact at 10 o'clock, Falcon warned. Nighthawk was already scanning, fingers tightening on the controls. The probe's approach was cautious but deliberate. Falcon and Nighthawk tightened formation, ready to respond. They were no longer 2 pilots facing overwhelming odds, but a shield protecting those who couldn't defend themselves. The probe came closer, and Falcon saw the glint of missile launchers. "Brace for possible attack," he said. The tension surged, the hours of waiting exploding into a moment of pure focus. But the probe didn't attack. Instead, it circled, probing their defenses before retreating back into the clouds. Falcon breathed out slowly. "They're testing us again." Nighthawk's voice was calm. "We'll be ready." The encounter was a reminder that the fight was ongoing, a game of cat and mouse played in the skies, where every decision could tip the balance. The two pilots stayed alert, eyes scanning the horizon, muscles tense but ready. As they returned to base, the sun high in the sky, a sense of accomplishment mixed with caution settled over them. The mission had been uneventful, but the warning was clear. The enemy was watching, waiting for an opening. Back on the ground, Falcon and Nighthawk debriefed with their squadron. The atmosphere was quieter now, but the message was sharp. They had passed the test, but the real challenge was still ahead. That night, Falcon lay awake staring at the ceiling, thoughts swirling. The sky was a dangerous place, beautiful but deadly, full of unseen threats. But it was also where they belonged. He knew the battles would come again, and when they did, he and Nighthawk would be ready, together. Theirs was a fight not just for survival, but for the future of those depending on them. And in the endless expanse of the sky, that mission was far from over. The sun had barely risen when Falcon and Nighthawk found themselves once again strapped into their cockpits, engines humming with that familiar power. The mission briefing had been terse. Intelligence indicated a significant enemy presence near a critical air corridor. This time, the threat was bigger, more coordinated, and more dangerous. The air was thick with tension as they prepared to face the unknown. As they soared into the brightening sky, their jets cut clean lines through the cold morning air. Communication was sparse but purposeful. Every glance at the radar, every shift in formation, held meaning. Their focus sharpened with each passing moment. This was no routine patrol. It was a prelude to a storm. Suddenly, the radar erupted with contacts, dozens of fast-moving blips closing in with deadly intent. The enemy had launched a full-scale assault. Falcon's heart pounded, adrenaline surging, but his voice remained calm. "Nighthawk, contact front. Brace for engagement." The sky exploded into chaos. Missiles fired, tracers streaked through the air, and enemy fighters lunged like predators. The two pilots immediately engaged, weaving through the deadly ballet with fierce precision. Falcon dove into a steep bank, narrowly avoiding a missile that left a trail of smoke inches behind him. "Nighthawk, 2 o'clock, missile incoming," Falcon warned. Nighthawk responded instantly, deploying flares that lit the sky with bursts of fiery color, confusing the missile's tracking system. The missile exploded harmlessly far behind them. Despite being outnumbered, their training and instinct kept them alive. The enemy fighters were aggressive, but Falcon and Nighthawk moved as one, anticipating each other's moves without a word. Every twist and turn was a calculated risk, a gamble that had to pay off. Falcon fired a missile that found its mark, sending an enemy fighter spiraling into the clouds. "One down," he said, voice steady but intense. "Good hit." "But more are coming," Nighthawk replied, eyes sharp behind his visor. The battle raged on, a relentless test of endurance and skill. The two pilots covered each other, trading roles between attacker and defender. The enemy was clever, coordinating attacks to overwhelm them, but Falcon and Nighthawk refused to yield. Time blurred. Minutes felt like hours as they danced between life and death. Their jets bore scars from near misses, scratches, dents, and smoke, but their spirits remained unbroken. Suddenly, Falcon Systems flashed a critical warning. "Damage to left engine. Losing power." His voice cut through the chaos, tension rising sharply. Nighthawk spotted the change, instinctively moving to shield his wingman. "Hold on, Falcon. I'm with you." With one engine failing, Falcon's jet began to falter. The controls became sluggish, response slower. He fought to keep the jet steady, pushing through the pain and exhaustion. Failure was not an option. The cargo plane they guarded was still in sight, struggling to maintain speed and altitude under enemy fire. Protecting it was their mission, no matter the cost. Nighthawk launched a missile that blasted another enemy fighter away, clearing a path for Falcon. "You can do this. Just a little farther." Falcon gritted his teeth, focusing all his strength on maintaining control. His jet shuddered, but he held the course. The enemy, sensing their prey slipping away, launched a final desperate assault. Missiles screamed toward them, but Falcon and Nighthawk deployed every countermeasure, weaving through the deadly storm. The cargo plane's crew counted on them. They couldn't fail. With a final surge of speed and resolve, Falcon guided the crippled jet alongside the cargo plane. Nighthawk followed close, fending off attackers with steady bursts of fire. The enemy began to break off, unwilling to press the attack further. The sky, once alive with danger, grew quiet again. Falcon's jet was failing fast. He radioed, "I'm heading for an emergency landing. Cover me." Nighthawk's voice was firm. "I've got your 6. You're not going down alone." Together, they turned toward the nearest airstrip. Falcon's jet groaned and sputtered, but he kept it steady. The ground rushed up, and with skill born of desperation, he landed hard but safe. Nighthawk touched down moments later, taxiing beside him. The two pilots exhaled deeply, bodies trembling from the ordeal. They had survived against impossible odds once more. But the cost was clear. Beyond the damage to their jets, beyond the fatigue in their bones, was a silent promise. The fight was far from over, and Falcon and Nighthawk would be ready to face it. The hangar was buzzing with activity when Falcon and Nighthawk rolled their battered jets to a stop. Mechanics and engineers swarmed their aircraft, inspecting every dent, every scorch mark left by the fierce battle. But the two pilots barely noticed the chaos around them. Their minds were still high in the sky, replaying every second of the fight. Falcon climbed out of his jet, muscles stiff, heart still racing. Nighthawk followed closely behind, his face grim but determined. They had pushed themselves to the brink, but they had protected the mission and each other. Their bond had grown stronger through fire and smoke. Inside the briefing room, the atmosphere was tense yet respectful. Commanders and strategists gathered around, eager to hear first-hand accounts. Falcon began, his voice steady but laced with exhaustion. He described the enemy's relentless tactics, the moments when death seemed certain, and the split-second decisions that turned the tide. Nighthawk added the details about their coordinated maneuvers, how their trust in one another was the key to survival. Every word painted a vivid picture of courage and skill under pressure. When the debrief ended, the squadron leader addressed them. "You two have shown exceptional bravery. Your actions saved lives and kept vital supply lines open. You've set a new standard for what it means to be pilots." Falcon and Nighthawk exchanged a brief glance, silently acknowledging the weight of those words. They weren't heroes because they wanted praise. They were heroes because they did what was necessary, no matter the cost. As days turned into weeks, life at the base slowly returned to routine. But the memory of the battle lingered. Both men spent hours reviewing footage, training harder, preparing for whatever came next. They knew peace was fragile, and the sky was never truly safe. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the airfield, Falcon and Nighthawk stood side by side, looking up at the stars. "We've come a long way," Falcon said quietly, "but there's still so much we don't know." Nighthawk nodded. "True. But whatever comes, we face it together, like always." The quiet determination in their voices was a promise, not just to each other, but to every person depending on them. They had faced overwhelming odds and survived. They had learned that trust, skill, and resilience were their greatest weapons. The sky was vast and unpredictable, but Falcon and Nighthawk were ready. Whatever battles awaited, they would meet them head-on, side by side. And they would always come home,